The moment a powerful man chooses dignity over pride, everyone in the room discovers who truly deserves respect. The crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across the grand ballroom of the Carter Grand Hotel, where Manhattan's wealthiest families gathered beneath ceilings painted with hand-finished murals imported from Florence decades earlier. Crystal glasses chimed softly. A string quartet played a familiar melody. Laughter drifted through the room as politicians, investors, celebrities, and business leaders celebrated what every magazine had already called the engagement of the year. Ethan Carter stood near the center of the ballroom in a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, accepting congratulations with the calm confidence that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. At 37, his reputation was built on discipline rather than charm. He rarely smiled for cameras, rarely raised his voice, and never allowed emotions to interfere with business. Tonight was supposed to be another carefully orchestrated success. Beside him stood Victoria Collins, elegant in an ivory designer gown that shimmered beneath the lights like flowing silk. She looked every bit the future wife of New York's most respected billionaire. Their photographs would dominate tomorrow's headlines before sunrise. Yet behind every polished smile lived moments no photographer could ever capture. At the far end of the ballroom, 26-year-old Claire Bennett quietly adjusted the white gloves that completed her housekeeping uniform. She wasn't serving champagne. She wasn't greeting guests. She simply moved through the room with practiced precision, making sure every detail remained invisible because the finest service was the kind no one noticed. Most guests never looked directly at the hotel staff. Claire had grown accustomed to that. Invisible people heard everything. They learned which voices carried kindness and which carried entitlement. She never complained. She simply continued working with the quiet dignity that had become her greatest strength. As another toast began, a young waiter hurried across the marble floor carrying a silver tray filled with champagne flutes. One guest stepped backward unexpectedly after greeting an old friend. Another reached for a glass at the exact same moment. The tray shifted only slightly. A single glass tipped forward. Champagne splashed across the front of Victoria's expensive gown before shattering harmlessly onto the polished floor. Silence arrived faster than the music could stop. Every nearby conversation disappeared at once. Victoria stared down at the sparkling stain spreading across the fabric before slowly lifting her eyes toward Claire, who happened to be standing closest to the accident. The young maid hadn't touched the tray. She hadn't spoken a word. She simply found herself standing nearest to someone searching for blame. Victoria's expression hardened. Without asking a single question, she stepped toward Claire. Her voice remained calm, but the disappointment inside it carried enough weight to make several employees lower their heads. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked. Claire met her gaze respectfully. "I wasn't involved, but I'll gladly help clean everything immediately." The answer should have ended the misunderstanding. Instead, it seemed to deepen Victoria's frustration. Around them, dozens of guests watched without moving. No one interrupted. No one questioned the assumption. They simply accepted that the woman wearing a housekeeping uniform must somehow be responsible. Victoria lifted her hand, ready to humiliate the quiet maid in front of every influential guest in the ballroom. Before anyone could even inhale, another hand reached forward. Ethan Carter closed his fingers firmly around Victoria's wrist. Not roughly. Not dramatically. Just enough to stop the gesture before it ever happened. The quartet fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the couple. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Ethan never looked at Claire. His steady gaze remained fixed on his fiancée as his voice cut through the frozen ballroom with calm authority. "In this hotel," he said quietly, "we do not punish innocent people." The silence lingered for several long seconds before the orchestra cautiously resumed its melody, softer now, as though even the musician sensed the atmosphere had changed. Ethan slowly released Victoria's wrist, his expression composed, offering neither embarrassment nor anger. He simply looked toward the hotel manager. "Please make sure Miss Bennett is able to continue her work without interruption." His words were calm, almost ordinary, yet they carried enough authority that no one questioned them. Claire lowered her head respectfully. "Thank you, sir." She did not sound relieved. She did not sound triumphant. She simply acknowledged his decision with the same quiet professionalism she brought to every task. Without another word, she knelt beside the broken glass, carefully collecting each sparkling piece while another employee handed her a fresh linen towel. Within minutes, the marble floor looked untouched, as though nothing unusual had happened. But everyone in the ballroom knew something had changed. As conversation slowly returned, whispers drifted through the room. Some guests wondered why Ethan had defended a maid so quickly. Others assumed he had merely protected the image of his hotel before hundreds of influential witnesses. Claire ignored every curious glance. She had learned long ago that attention rarely lasted. Work always remained. She carried the cleaning supplies back through a quiet service corridor lined with polished brass doors and neatly framed photographs of the hotel's 100-year history. The noise of the ballroom faded behind thick walls until only the gentle hum of the ventilation system remained. Inside the employee hallway, the atmosphere felt entirely different. Housekeepers folded fresh towels. Kitchen assistants hurried carts filled with plated desserts. Engineers checked lighting panels before the evening reception continued. Everyone had heard what happened. No one said anything at first. Finally, an older housekeeper named Margaret looked up from a stack of fresh linens. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Claire offered a gentle smile. "I am perfectly fine." Margaret studied her for a moment before shaking her head with quiet admiration. "You always say that." Claire simply continued arranging fresh supplies onto her service cart. She believed every guest deserved the same level of care, regardless of whether they noticed her or not. That belief had survived difficult supervisors, impatient customers, endless double shifts, and more than one misunderstanding she never bothered to correct. Every morning before sunrise, she arrived nearly an hour early. She walked every hallway herself, checking flowers, straightening picture frames by fractions of an inch, polishing brass railings that already reflected like mirrors, and making certain each suite felt welcoming before the first guest opened a door. Most people assumed housekeeping required only hard work. Claire knew it also required observation. She noticed when elderly guests struggled with heavy luggage before anyone asked. She quietly replaced children's stuffed animals exactly where parents had left them. She remembered which returning guests preferred feather pillows and which requested fragrance-free rooms. She never expected praise. Excellence, to her, was something practiced even when nobody was watching. Later that afternoon, she entered one of the executive suites to prepare it for an international investor arriving from Seattle. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park as she carefully adjusted the curtains until both sides hung with perfect symmetry. She placed a handwritten welcome card on the polished walnut desk, aligned precisely with the edge. Then she noticed a tiny fingerprint on the crystal water pitcher. Most people would never have seen it. Claire quietly polished the glass until it disappeared. She stepped back, examined the room one final time, and smiled almost invisibly. It was never about perfection for others. It was about refusing to let circumstances decide the quality of the person she chose to become. By early evening the celebration had faded into private conversations, but Ethan Carter's mind refused to return to contracts, investors, or congratulatory speeches. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office overlooking Midtown Manhattan, the city stretched beneath a sky painted with shades of amber and deep blue. Normally the view helped him think. Tonight it only reminded him how quickly one unexpected moment could interrupt years of carefully controlled routine. Ethan loosened his tie and placed a leather portfolio on his desk before walking toward the espresso machine that occupied one corner of the office. His assistant, Daniel Brooks, entered quietly carrying the final reports from the engagement event. "Everything has been wrapped up downstairs," Daniel said. "The guests have left, and the press coverage has been overwhelmingly positive." Ethan nodded without looking up. "Any complaints from the staff?" Daniel hesitated. "None have been submitted." Ethan poured a cup of coffee before asking another question that surprised even himself. "The housekeeper from the ballroom. Claire Bennett. How long has she been working here? Daniel quickly searched the employee database on his tablet. Just under 8 months. Excellent attendance. No disciplinary reports. Multiple commendations from department supervisors. Guests consistently rate her service among the highest in the hotel. Ethan accepted the information with a thoughtful silence. He had reviewed thousands of employee records over the years. Exceptional performance rarely attracted his attention because excellence was simply expected inside Carter Grand Hotel. Yet something about Claire Bennett lingered in his thoughts. Not because she had been accused unfairly. Mistakes happened. Misunderstandings happened. What stayed with him was her response. She had not defended herself with desperation. She had not blamed anyone else. She had simply remained calm, almost as though protecting her own dignity mattered more than proving someone wrong. Ethan had spent his entire career studying people. Investors revealed themselves through negotiations. Competitors revealed themselves under pressure. Employees revealed themselves when nobody important seemed to be watching. He had built an international hospitality empire by recognizing character before talent. His father used to repeat the same lesson when Ethan was a teenager walking through construction sites instead of attending lavish parties. Luxury is never measured by marble or gold, Richard Carter would say. Luxury begins with how people are treated when they have nothing to offer you. Those words had shaped every hotel carrying the Carter name. Every employee, from executives to housekeepers, represented the company's reputation. Respect inside the organization was not optional. It was policy. It was culture. It was identity. Ethan walked toward the window, watching streams of headlights flow beneath him like rivers of light. Daniel. Yes, sir. Quietly review the ballroom footage from this afternoon. Daniel looked up. You believe the incident was intentional? Ethan remained silent for several seconds before answering. I believe assumptions are expensive. Facts are not. Daniel gave a small nod. I will have security examine every camera angle. After his assistant left, Ethan stood alone in the quiet office. Across the city, thousands of windows glowed against the evening skyline, each hiding stories no balance sheet could measure. Downstairs, somewhere beyond dozens of polished hallways, Claire Bennett was probably finishing another shift exactly as she had begun it, without expecting recognition, without asking for sympathy, and without realizing that one quiet decision to remain composed had awakened a question in the mind of a man who rarely questioned his own judgment. Ethan looked once more toward the lights of the hotel below before quietly speaking to the empty office. People always reveal themselves. Sometimes it is simply a matter of paying attention long enough to see it. The following morning arrived with clear skies and crisp autumn air drifting through the revolving doors of Carter Grand Hotel. By 7 o'clock the lobby had already come alive with business travelers checking out, fresh arrivals pulling polished suitcases across the marble floor, and employees moving with the quiet precision that kept the five-star property running like clockwork. Claire Bennett began her shift exactly as she always did. She greeted every coworker by name, collected her assignment sheet, and walked each hallway with the same measured pace that never seemed hurried, yet never wasted a second. Excellence had become her routine long before anyone noticed it. Around 9 o'clock, Victoria Collins entered the hotel through the private executive entrance wearing oversized sunglasses, a tailored cream-colored coat, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who expected every room to adjust itself around her presence. Several employees greeted her politely. She acknowledged only a few with brief nods before making her way toward the presidential floor where final preparations for an upcoming charity gala were already underway. Claire happened to be arranging fresh white orchids near one of the executive lounges when Victoria approached. She paused beside the floral arrangement and studied it with narrowed eyes. Those flowers are uneven, she said without greeting. Claire stepped closer, examining the arrangement carefully. Thank you for pointing that out. I will adjust them immediately. She rotated one vase less than an inch until every stem formed a balanced display. Victoria watched silently before replying, better. Although someone with proper training would not have needed to be told. Claire simply smiled politely. I appreciate the feedback. The answer seemed to frustrate Victoria more than any argument could have. She had expected defensiveness. Instead, she found only quiet professionalism. Throughout the morning their paths crossed again and again. Victoria requested bottled water even though a server was standing nearby. Claire delivered it with a warm smile. She asked for a conference room to be prepared differently after it had already been arranged according to her own earlier instructions. Claire calmly reset every chair without complaint. When Victoria changed her mind once more about the placement of decorative candles, Claire thanked her for the clarification and carefully completed the task again. Several employees exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret quietly whispered to another housekeeper, "She keeps finding reasons." Claire overheard the comment but continued folding fresh linen napkins with steady hands. Shortly before lunch, Ethan arrived unexpectedly for a meeting with international investors. He crossed the lobby speaking with Daniel about quarterly expansion plans, barely noticing the activity around him. Victoria immediately joined his side with a bright smile that seemed entirely different from the expression employees had witnessed all morning. Her voice softened. Her posture relaxed. She laughed easily as though nothing unpleasant had happened the previous evening. Ethan listened politely while greeting department managers along the way. As they passed the executive lounge, he briefly noticed Claire replacing fresh coffee service for an afternoon meeting. She worked quietly, unaware that he had glanced in her direction. Ethan continued walking, but something else caught his attention. Every employee who interacted with Claire appeared comfortable. They trusted her. They thanked her. Even senior supervisors spoke to her with genuine respect. Yet whenever Victoria approached, conversation seemed to stop. Smiles faded. Shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. It was a subtle difference, one invisible to most people, but Ethan had spent decades observing details others ignored. Daniel followed his gaze before speaking softly. "Interesting, is not it?" Ethan kept walking without answering immediately. A few moments later he finally spoke in an almost reflective tone. "People reveal more through the reactions they create than through the words they choose." Unknown to everyone else, security had already begun reviewing every camera angle from the engagement party, and before the day ended, one overlooked recording would quietly begin changing everything. Late that afternoon Daniel entered Ethan's office carrying a small encrypted tablet instead of the usual stack of reports. He quietly closed the door behind him before placing the device on the walnut conference table. Security finished reviewing every camera angle from the engagement reception, he said. Ethan looked up from a contract he had been reading. "Show me everything." Daniel tapped the screen, and the ballroom appeared from a ceiling camera that overlooked the entire reception. The footage played without sound. Guests laughed beneath glittering chandeliers. Servers moved gracefully between conversations. Claire could be seen near the floral display, replacing folded napkins. On a nearby service station. She never came within several feet of the champagne tray. Ethan watched carefully without speaking. Daniel switched to another angle recorded from a decorative column facing the center of the ballroom. This view revealed details almost impossible to notice from the crowded floor. The young waiter carrying the silver tray paused as a guest stepped backward unexpectedly. At that same instant Victoria turned sharply to greet another socialite. Her designer handbag brushed against the edge of the tablecloth. The linen shifted only slightly, but it was enough. One champagne flute slid across the polished surface before tipping from the tray entirely. The glass struck the marble floor and shattered harmlessly. Claire was still standing several feet away arranging decorative candles. Ethan leaned forward. "Pause it." Daniel froze the image. Claire remained completely outside the path of the accident. Ethan stared silently for several seconds before saying, "Run it again." They watched the sequence 3 more times from different cameras positioned throughout the ballroom. Every recording reached exactly the same conclusion. Claire had not caused the spill. She had not touched the tray. She had not even been close enough to influence what happened. Daniel opened another camera angle taken from the entrance hallway. "There is something else." The recording captured Claire immediately after the glass shattered. Instead of stepping away from the confusion, she instinctively moved toward an elderly guest standing near the broken glass, gently guiding the woman one careful step backward before anyone else reacted. Only after making certain the guest was safe did Claire retrieve cleaning supplies. She never pointed toward Victoria. She never defended herself. She simply protected someone else before quietly returning to her responsibilities. Ethan slowly exhaled. She saw the hazard before anyone else. Daniel nodded. That appears to be her first instinct. Ethan remained silent again, remembering Claire's calm expression while standing before hundreds of influential guests. She had accepted blame without accusing another person, even though the cameras proved she could have cleared her name immediately if she had chosen to create a scene. Has Claire requested that anyone review this footage? Ethan finally asked. No, sir. Has she filed a complaint? No. Has she spoken negatively about Miss Collins to anyone? Daniel glanced through employee notes collected after the incident. Not once. Every supervisor who spoke with her reported the same response. She simply thanked everyone for checking on her and returned to work. Ethan stood and walked toward the window overlooking the hotel entrance where guests arrived beneath fluttering American flags. Interesting, he murmured. Daniel waited quietly. Ethan continued without turning around. Some people defend their reputation by speaking louder. Others defend it by living well enough that the truth eventually speaks for them. At that exact moment, neither man noticed Margaret leading a nervous new housekeeping employee through the lobby. The young woman accidentally dropped a stack of folded towels near the front desk. Before anyone else could react, Claire was already kneeling beside her, smiling warmly as she helped gather every towel from the polished floor. No cameras were focused on her this time. No executives were watching. She offered the same kindness anyway, completely unaware that the evidence inside Ethan's office had begun revealing a far greater story than a simple misunderstanding. The next morning, Carter Grand Hotel welcomed the board of the Carter Foundation for its annual planning conference, bringing together executives, trustees, and longtime business partners from across the country. The executive dining room overlooked Central Park, its tall windows filling the room with bright autumn sunlight while polished silver reflected across crisp white tablecloths. Claire Bennett quietly prepared the room before the first guests arrived, making one final inspection of every chair, every coffee cup, every folder placed neatly before each seat. She noticed a chair sitting slightly out of alignment and adjusted it by less than an inch before stepping back with quiet satisfaction. Just as she prepared to leave, Victoria Collins entered, with two event coordinators following behind her. She glanced around the room before her eye settled on Claire. "You missed something," she said coolly. Claire looked across the table. "Please let me know what I can improve." Victoria pointed toward the center floral arrangement. "Those lilies are facing the wrong direction." Claire examined the display carefully. The arrangement matched the designer's original layout exactly, but she answered with the same calm voice she always used. "I will correct it immediately." She gently rotated the arrangement. Victoria watched for another moment before walking toward the conference table. Her fingertips brushed one of the leather presentation folders, shifting it several inches out of place. Then she turned back toward Claire. "Now the folders are uneven as well." Without hesitation, Claire quietly walked over and straightened every folder again. One of the coordinators exchanged an uncomfortable glance with the other, but neither spoke. A few minutes later, Ethan entered with Daniel and several board members. The meeting began promptly, filled with discussions about scholarships, hospital donations, and community projects supported by the Carter Foundation. Claire served fresh coffee with practiced grace, moving almost silently around the room. As she reached one end of the table, an elderly trustee named Eleanor Whitmore accidentally dropped her reading glasses beneath her chair. Before anyone noticed, Claire gently picked them up with both hands and placed them beside Mrs. Whitmore's notebook. "Thank you, dear," the older woman said with a warm smile. "You always seem to notice what everyone else misses." Claire simply nodded. "I am happy to help." Victoria observed the exchange without expression. During a short break, she approached Ethan near the windows. "You seem unusually interested in your employees lately," she remarked lightly. Ethan looked toward the conference table where Claire was quietly replacing empty water pitchers. "I am interested in people who care about their work." Victoria smiled politely, although something behind her eyes briefly tightened. "You are reading far too much into ordinary hospitality," Ethan answered without raising his voice. "Character often appears ordinary until someone places it beside entitlement." Victoria laughed softly, dismissing the comment, but the conversation ended there. Across the room, Claire finished arranging fresh notepads before quietly excusing herself. As she reached the hallway, she noticed one of the new housekeeping employees struggling to carry an oversized box of supplies. Without a second thought, she took the heavier side herself, helping the younger woman balance the load all the way to the service elevator. Neither woman realized Eleanor Whitmore had witnessed the entire moment through the conference room doorway. The elderly trustee slowly turned toward Ethan and spoke with quiet certainty. "Young man, the finest employee in this hotel is not the one wearing the most expensive suit. It is the one who believes nobody important is watching and still chooses kindness every single time." Ethan followed Claire with his eyes until the elevator doors quietly closed, and for the first time since the engagement reception, he began to wonder not who Claire Bennett had become, but what kind of life could shape someone into a person who never stopped choosing grace. That evening, the last guests departed as the golden glow of sunset faded behind the Manhattan skyline, leaving Carter Grand Hotel wrapped in the quiet rhythm that arrived only after another flawless day of service. Claire Bennett finished organizing the housekeeping inventory before removing her name badge and placing it carefully inside her locker. Most employees hurried home after long shifts, but Claire still had one final stop before leaving. She carried a small paper bag through several quiet blocks until she reached a modest brick apartment building on the Upper West Side. Inside apartment 4B, the scent of homemade vegetable soup filled the air. An older man looked up from his favorite armchair and smiled the moment she entered. "You are late today, sweetheart." Claire leaned down and kissed her father gently on the forehead. The hotel was busy. Thomas Bennett smiled warmly. "Busy usually means successful." Claire laughed softly while placing fresh groceries onto the kitchen counter. "You always find the optimistic version." Thomas had once managed one of Boston's most respected boutique hotels. Years earlier, he had taught Claire everything he believed truly mattered about hospitality. Not luxury. Not wealth. Not prestige. Service. Respect. Quiet excellence. Life had changed after his health declined unexpectedly, forcing him into early retirement. Medical treatments had consumed nearly every family savings account. Claire had quietly postponed her own career, selling what little she owned to keep him comfortable while searching for stable work that offered immediate income. She never spoke about sacrifice because, to her, love was never a sacrifice. It was simply responsibility accepted with gratitude. As Thomas slowly stirred his soup, his eyes rested on her tired face. Something happened at work. It was not a question. Claire smiled gently. "Nothing important." He chuckled knowingly. "You inherited that answer from your mother." She sat across from him, folding her hands around a warm mug of tea. "There was a misunderstanding. It has already passed." Thomas studied her quietly before speaking. "Did you defend yourself?" Claire lowered her eyes for a moment. "Not with words." He nodded with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes silence protects dignity better than arguments ever could. She reached across the small table and squeezed his hand. "You taught me that." Across the city, Ethan Carter remained inside his office long after most executives had gone home. Daniel had quietly completed another background review, not because Ethan distrusted Claire, but because curiosity had replaced assumption. The report contained no scandals. No hidden fortune. No dramatic headlines. Instead, it revealed something unexpectedly ordinary. Claire Bennett had graduated near the top of her hospitality management program. She had accepted an assistant management position at a respected boutique hotel before resigning less than 2 years later. Financial records showed large medical payments over several consecutive years. Employment history afterward reflected temporary jobs before she joined Carter Grand Hotel. As a housekeeper, Ethan closed the file slowly. Nothing in the report suggested failure. Instead, it described someone who had quietly placed family ahead of ambition without asking anyone to notice. He looked toward the framed photograph of his own parents resting on the bookshelf behind his desk. His father had often reminded him that the strongest people were rarely the loudest. They were usually the ones carrying invisible burdens while making life easier for everyone else. Ethan leaned back in his chair, remembering Claire's steady voice, her calm expression, and the countless moments she had chosen kindness when nobody expected it. Somewhere beyond the illuminated skyline, a young woman prepared another simple dinner for the father she refused to abandon, completely unaware that the truth about her life had begun reshaping the heart of the man who once believed success could be measured only by achievement instead of quiet devotion. 3 days later, the Carter Foundation hosted its annual appreciation gala inside the hotel's magnificent grand ballroom, inviting donors, trustees, executives, civic leaders, and longtime partners from across the country. Every crystal chandelier shimmered above elegantly dressed guests while a quiet jazz ensemble filled the room with warm melodies. Claire Bennett moved gracefully among the tables, making certain every detail reflected the standards she had promised herself to uphold on the first day she joined the hotel. She never imagined this evening would become the turning point of her life. Ethan Carter stood near the stage greeting distinguished guests as Victoria Collins remained at his side, smiling confidently for photographers. To everyone watching, they appeared to be the perfect couple preparing for a perfect future. Yet Ethan's expression had grown noticeably quieter during the past several days. He observed more than he spoke. He listened more than he judged. He had begun measuring people differently. During dinner, one of the elderly trustees accidentally dropped a porcelain dessert plate onto the carpet. The plate broke into several harmless pieces, and before anyone nearby could respond, Claire calmly stepped forward carrying a small safety kit. "Please remain seated," she said gently. "I will take care of everything." She carefully cleared the area while reassuring nearby guests that everything was under control. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore smiled appreciatively. "You always make people feel comfortable, even when something unexpected happens." Claire simply nodded. Everyone deserves to enjoy their evening. Victoria watched the exchange with growing impatience. As Claire finished cleaning the area, Victoria spoke loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. Some people certainly enjoy receiving attention for doing ordinary work. The room grew noticeably quieter. Claire looked toward her politely. "I am only doing my job." Victoria folded her arms. "Then perhaps remember your place instead of behaving as though everyone should admire you." Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel glanced toward Ethan, whose calm expression revealed nothing. Claire lowered her eyes respectfully before answering. "I have never asked anyone for admiration." Her voice remained gentle. "Only the opportunity to do honest work." Victoria gave a brief laugh that sounded pleasant on the surface but carried unmistakable contempt beneath it. Honest work does not make someone important. Ethan slowly placed his glass on the table. The soft sound echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Every conversation stopped. He rose from his chair with the same composed confidence that had guided billion-dollar negotiations for years. Looking first toward Claire, then toward the assembled guests, he spoke in an even voice that carried effortlessly across the room. "Importance is never determined by a job title." His eyes finally met Victoria's. "It is revealed by the respect we choose to give people who cannot offer us anything in return." Nobody moved. Ethan continued calmly. "Security reviewed every camera angle from our engagement reception. Claire Bennett was completely innocent. She protected a guest before thinking of herself, accepted blame she did not deserve, and never once attempted to embarrass anyone involved." Victoria's confident smile slowly disappeared. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed the engagement ring box she had proudly shown to friends only days earlier. He placed it quietly on the table between them. "I cannot build a future with someone who mistakes status for character." The words were spoken without anger, without humiliation, and without raising his voice. "This engagement ends tonight." The ballroom remained completely still. Claire stood frozen, not because she expected recognition, but because she had never imagined another person's decision would be influenced by her quiet example. Ethan turned toward her once more and offered a respectful nod instead of applause or grand gestures. In that single moment, everyone present understood that the greatest act of leadership they had witnessed all evening was not the ending of an engagement. It was the decision to place dignity above appearance, truth above convenience, and character above every symbol of power surrounding them. The ballroom remained silent long after the final words settled into the air. No applause came. No whispers interrupted the stillness. It was the kind of silence that only appeared when people realized they had just witnessed something far greater than an ordinary social event. Claire Bennett lowered her eyes, almost hoping the attention would drift elsewhere. She had never wanted to become the center of anyone's story. She had only wanted to finish her work with the same care she brought to every ordinary day. Ethan Carter looked toward the guests one final time before addressing the room with quiet composure. The Carter name has never been built on wealth alone. It has been built by people who believed respect is the first service we owe every human being. His words were neither dramatic nor rehearsed. They sounded like a lesson he had carried for years but had only now fully understood himself. He turned toward Claire. "Miss Bennett." She stepped forward politely. "Yes, sir." Ethan offered a small smile. "Thank you for reminding all of us what professionalism truly looks like." Claire shook her head gently. "I was only doing the work I was hired to do." Several guests exchanged thoughtful glances. Eleanor Whitmore smiled warmly. "That answer explains everything." The evening slowly resumed, although nothing felt quite the same. Conversations became softer. Employees who had once hurried quietly through the ballroom now found guests thanking them by name. Several donors personally expressed appreciation to servers, housekeepers, and maintenance staff before leaving. It was as though one quiet moment had changed the atmosphere of the entire hotel. The following Monday morning, Ethan requested a brief meeting with Claire in his office. She entered wearing the same neatly pressed housekeeping uniform, standing with calm confidence despite the intimidating surroundings. Ethan invited her to sit, but she remained standing until he smiled and repeated the invitation. "Miss Bennett, after reviewing your work history and speaking with your supervisors, I would like to offer you a position in our employee development program. It is designed for future hotel leaders. The decision is entirely yours." Claire looked at the folder resting on the desk but did not reach for it immediately. "Thank you, sir. I am honored." Ethan noticed the hesitation in her eyes. "You are thinking about your father." Claire nodded quietly. "His medical appointments are my first responsibility." Ethan smiled with genuine understanding. "Then we will build the schedule around your responsibilities instead of asking you to abandon them. Strong companies should support good people, not force them to choose between work and family." For the first time since they had met, Claire's eyes reflected unmistakable emotion. "Thank you." Months passed. Guests began recognizing Claire not because of the gala, but because of the warmth she quietly brought to every interaction. New employees often found her patiently teaching them details no handbook could explain. Ethan continued leading his company, but those closest to him noticed one meaningful difference. Whenever he visited a Carter property, he greeted every employee before attending executive meetings. He listened more carefully. He observed more patiently. The lesson he had rediscovered never left him. One autumn afternoon, Claire walked through the hotel lobby beside her father, whose health had steadily improved. Thomas looked around at the beautiful building before smiling proudly at his daughter. "You never stopped becoming the person you already were." Claire squeezed his arm gently. "You taught me that dignity is something nobody else can give us and nobody else can take away. Outside, golden leaves drifted across the sidewalks as guests entered and departed beneath the revolving doors. Inside, life continued with the quiet rhythm of genuine hospitality, where every greeting carried respect and every unseen act of kindness mattered. Because in the end, people rarely remember who held the most power in the room. They remember the one person who quietly chose compassion when everyone else was watching status instead.